Hello and welcome to the video lecture on designing fields, data integrity. So now what data integrity is trying to do is trying to control the data that exists in our database. Really field by field. All right, so we're talking about designing a field. So when we're designing a field, we want to perhaps put constraints in place to make sure that we're controlling the data and that we can make sure that valid data is being entered. So for instance, we can use default values. Various places you can use default values. If you have a field that's 99% of the time or 90% of the time is going to be a particular value, then you can set up the default value to be that. For instance, if I primarily do business in New York and most of my customers and most of my shipping addresses are in New York, I can set up a default value for the state fields in tables associated with that kind of data to NY. This way my data entry people don't have to necessarily change that as often. I could put in things like if I want, you've probably seen fields like date entered and date updated and date created or created by. We can set default values to be things like the operating system user, today's date. We can set up default values to be true, to be false, various things. So default values are very, very commonly used and very powerful. We can use range controls. You saw this in the check constraints and the create table statements. So we can have a list of allowable values. Or we can set up validation rules. For instance, you have a begin date and an end date. Well, we can set up a validation rule that makes sure that the end date is actually after the begin date. It wouldn't make sense to allow a user to put an end date that's prior to the begin date. We have no value control, which again you should be familiar with from your create table statements, whether or not we allow values to be missing from fields. And referential integrity you should also be somewhat familiar with, as far as this can help with range control, right? So if we've set up lookup tables, the lookup table, due to the fact that it is a foreign key primary key scenario, we can make sure that users can only pick values that are in the lookup table. And again, just general referential integrity as far as things like customer IDs being used in the order table, things of that nature. The textbook also gets into Sarbanes-Oxley and other regulatory compliance type of legislation that has dramatically affected database designers, because we have to enforce a lot of that legislatively created restrictions. So, and that again, Sarbanes-Oxley is especially associated with finance data, but it affects other things as well. And then we may have set up at some point, or we're taking over a database where there is missing data. In other words, we've allowed nulls, and that's fine in some cases. And then later on we find out that, oh my God, we really needed to have data in there. So what do? You can't change something from not null, from allowing nulls to not allowing nulls unless you fill all the missing data. So you can put in estimates, depending on the type of data. You can use some kind of a formula. At the bottom you can see that triggers can be used. Triggers are very powerful tools. We'll get into that in the advanced class. You can construct a report of the missing values so that someone else can handle them manually. Or you can write programs that just ignore the missing data, unless the value is significant, and that's that's an analysis thing. You have to determine that yourself. And that will end the video on field integrity.